No one else in my family was a musician, but my parents loved music, my grandparents loved music. It was always around a little bit in my family. You know, we had a record player and uh, but I think just growing up during that time in the 50s, it just, as rock and roll was starting to happen, and I just sort of followed along with whatever was popular at the time, and I think very, very early on, I think I was about 4 years old or 5 years old when we first got a television, and I would watch the Mickey Mouse Club in the afternoon, and the leader of the Mouseketeers was this guy named Jimmy, and he would play a guitar, and there was something, I just thought that was really cool, and at that time I made myself like a pretend guitar out of a piece of cardboard and rubber bands, and somehow I just stuck with that my whole life, you know. Well, when I was in fourth grade, they would come around in the public schools and ask if anyone wanted to play an instrument. And at that time, my father thought clarinet would be a good instrument. So I started in the school music program playing clarinet, and then I got into this marching band, and really looking back on it, this fantastic teacher that led the marching band, and I also studied privately with him. You know, he's very strict, sort of almost military kind of process I went through. You know, I had to practice every day and tap my foot in the right place, and you know, at the time it was kind of harsh almost. I mean, I remember one time I was even crying at the end of one of the lessons because I couldn't do what he wanted me to do. But he just kept on me, and somehow I look back at that as being just so much of the basis for what I do came from that. Like a friend of mine across the street had a guitar, or actually a bunch of, there were guitars around at my friends' houses and stuff. And there was a friend of mine that lived across the street that was a little bit older than me, I really looked up to this guy. He was kind of my hero from when I was maybe 5 years old. He was, you know, I'd be in kindergarten and he'd be in second grade. And so anyway, he was the first one to get a real guitar, and then he started playing in a band, and I would go sneaking around his house and looking in his window while they were practicing, and I just thought it was so cool. And so it was just sort of then I'd get to play his guitar maybe a little bit, or another friend had a guitar, and I'd sort of mess around with it. And gradually I must have been maybe 12 or 13. My parents got me just a $20 cheap guitar for Christmas. And I guess the point that I think where it really began was I think I was 14, and I saved up money and bought an electric guitar. And I remember the day I told my mother I wanted to be see, all this stuff in the 50s, it's like hot rods and surfing, and even though I lived in Colorado, I would buy surf magazines and dinosaurs and outer space, and I really was into like hot rods, and I wanted to be a race car driver. And I used to buy, I had like a lawnmower engine that I would take apart, and I had big plans to make some sort of racing car. And then one day I thought, man, I think I want to get a guitar instead of having this racing car. And I remember really clearly one day coming home after school when I had made this decision and told my mother. I remember seeing her in the alleyway behind our house, and I said, "Mommy, I decided I don't want to be a race car driver. I want to get an electric guitar." And she was like, "Oh, this is wonderful." She was so excited and relieved that I didn't want to be a race car driver. So anyway, then I saved up my money and I got an electric guitar. And at that time, as soon as you had if you owned the instrument, then you were automatically in a band. You didn't really have to play. My friend got an electric guitar, and then within a couple weeks, we were playing at parties on weekends. You know, it was, and that's been it's still kind of like that. That's my the music has been my whole social life, really, I guess.